This phone raised more than $4 million. It's called the Unihertz Titan II Elite. It has a physical keyboard, a square screen, and it looks like something that should have gone extinct years ago. We all know that Blackberry built an empire on keyboard phones, and when Apple introduced the iPhone, it collapsed. Phones with a keyboard lost. Case closed. But somehow, they're starting to make a comeback. And this isn't just nostalgia. Yeah, many of us miss the feeling of typing on real buttons, but that explanation starts to fall apart the moment you look a bit closer at what's happening. A large portion of the 8,800 plus Kickstarter backers never owned a Blackberry, and the company building them isn't trying to recreate the past either. It's trying to solve a modern problem, a problem that didn't really exist when Blackberry ruled the digital world. To understand why this phone exists, we have to remember what Blackberry actually was. In the early 2000s, Blackberry wasn't just another phone company. It was the phone company. If you were walking through a financial district in New York, London, or Toronto, you'd see them everywhere. Traders carried them, lawyers carried them, executives carried them. Airports were filled with people staring down at tiny screens while their thumbs flew across the rows of plastic keys. The phones became so addictive that people gave it a nickname, Crackberry. And what was it about them that was so addicting? It was getting an email. Yep, that's it. At the time, having a phone that instantly notified you when you received an email felt revolutionary. Before Blackberry, email belonged to your desk. If somebody sent you an important message, it waited until you got to your computer. But Blackberry changed that. The moment an email arrived, your phone vibrated. You didn't have to check your inbox or constantly refresh it. Your phone did that for you. For the first time, your inbox lived in your pocket. The company behind it, Research in Motion, had accidentally built something every professional wanted and every competitor struggled to copy. The result was explosive. Subscribers climbed into the millions, then tens of millions. By 2011, BlackBerry had roughly 85 million users worldwide, and the company was generating nearly $20 billion in annual revenue. In some markets, BlackBerry even controlled more than half of the smartphone industry. For millions of people, a smartphone and a BlackBerry were effectively the same thing. But the appeal kept growing, and it went even beyond work. BlackBerry Messenger, or BBM, transformed the phone into its own social network. Messages arrived instantly, and read receipts, the little indicator that a message was delivered or read, something that's now essential in every modern messaging app, that existed in BBM years before competitors even offered the feature. The device became more than a productivity tool. It was a social platform and a status symbol. Everyone wanted a BlackBerry, even world leaders. After winning the 2008 presidential election, Barack Obama fought to keep his BlackBerry despite pressure from security agencies to abandon it. Eventually, government engineers and intelligence specialists created a heavily modified, secure version of the phone rather than forcing him to give his up. But just think about that. The President of the United States wanted his BlackBerry badly enough that the government redesigned one specifically for him. That's how important these devices had become. Looking back now, it's difficult to overstate how dominant BlackBerry was. The company had the users, the profits, the loyalty, the brand, and perhaps most importantly, it had something that appeared impossible to replace: the keyboard. Customers loved it, professionals depended on it, and BlackBerry became convinced that those tiny rows of keys were one of the most valuable advantages in technology. Things were going so well that everything seemed to point in one direction: success. But then, fatefully, in January of 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco carrying a device missing the one thing BlackBerry believed nobody would ever give up. Looking back, it's difficult to appreciate how strange it was to see Jobs unveil the iPhone. Instead of a physical keyboard, there was just a screen. From BlackBerry's perspective, this looked less like the future and more like a mistake. After all, everyone knew touchscreens were terrible for typing. Early touchscreens weren't particularly good. They were slower than physical keyboards, they made mistakes, and you couldn't feel the keys under your fingers. Giving up the keyboard seemed irrational, and BlackBerry executives weren't worried. When the iPhone launched, BlackBerry co-CEO Jim Balsillie dismissed it as just another competitor entering an already crowded market. Months later, he openly mocked typing on a touchscreen. The other co-CEO, Mike Lazaridis, was equally confident. Even after the iPhone arrived, he continued arguing that physical keyboards represented the future of mobile devices. If you looked at the market in 2007, their confidence wasn't completely unreasonable. Customers still loved the keyboard, professionals depended on it, and even the President of the United States carried one. Why would anyone willingly replace that with a flat piece of glass? What they missed was that Apple wasn't really selling a better keyboard. Apple was selling a different vision. BlackBerry saw the smartphone primarily as a communication device, but Apple saw it as a pocket computer. The original iPhone wasn't perfect by any means. It lacked features that BlackBerry users already had. Business customers were not going to be abandoning their keyboards overnight. And for a brief moment, it even looked like BlackBerry might be right, but then something happened that changed the entire industry. The App Store. When the App Store launched, the smartphone stopped being a product and started becoming a platform. Thousands of developers could now build new experiences for the device. It wasn't just about email and messaging anymore. Now there could be navigation, gaming, music, photography, shopping, banking, and eventually almost every digital activity people performed throughout the day. The App Store changed a smartphone from a phone into a computer. The release of Android accelerated the shift even further, and every year the screens got bigger, the apps got better, and the ecosystems became stronger. Customers were spending less time typing and more time tapping, and BlackBerry tried their best to respond. They put out the Storm, then the Playbook, then the BlackBerry 10. Each one of these was supposed to close the gap, but instead, it just revealed how far behind the company had fallen. While Apple and Google were building ecosystems, BlackBerry was defending its individual features. The common explanation people give for why BlackBerry failed is because people stopped wanting keyboards, but that's not really what happened. BlackBerry thought it was competing against the touchscreen, and it wasn't. It was competing against an entirely new definition of what a phone was. The keyboard wasn't the problem. In many situations, it was still the better option for typing. The problem was that typing had become a much smaller part of what people actually wanted from their phones. Customers weren't buying smartphones to send more emails. They were buying them to do everything else. By the middle of the 2010s, the collapse was impossible to ignore. The company's subscriber base fell from 85 million users to just a fraction of that. Its market share evaporated and its phones disappeared from shelves. Eventually, BlackBerry just stopped making smartphones altogether. For most people, that seemed like the end of the story. The touchscreen had won definitively and the keyboard had lost. The market had spoken. Or at least that's what everyone assumed, because years later, long after BlackBerry disappeared, something unexpected started happening. Throughout history, technologies rarely disappear as cleanly as we expect. Sometimes they survive by solving a different problem. Mechanical watches were supposed to die when quartz arrived, but instead they became symbols of craftsmanship and human connection. Vinyl records were also supposed to disappear when CDs arrived, but even when streaming made music effectively infinite, vinyl sales have continued growing for nearly 2 decades, with Americans buying tens of millions of records in 2025 alone. Even books followed a similar path. E-readers made carrying a library effortless, and yet hundreds of millions of printed books are still sold every year because many readers continue to value the experience of a physical object. There's something that a physical book has that an e-reader just can't replace. And all of this brings us back to the Unihertz Titan II Elite, a modern Android phone with a physical keyboard, a square display, and a design that looks strangely familiar. For years, different companies have tried to bring back the keyboard, and at first, Unihertz seemed to be yet another company launching another keyboard phone into a market that had spent nearly 20 years moving in the opposite direction. But despite all of that, nearly 9,000 people have backed the phone and pledged a total of $4 million. So what has changed now that the keyboard may have a real chance at a comeback? Well, imagine picking up your phone to answer a text. A few minutes later, you're watching a video, then maybe another one, then maybe another one, and at some point you realize you've completely forgotten why you picked up the phone in the first place. Most people know exactly what that feels like, and it's because the smartphone industry follows a simple formula: bigger screens, better apps, more content, more doom scrolling, less friction. Modern smartphones are designed to keep you using them. The average Gen Z member now spends around 9 hours per day just looking at screens. That's more time than many people spend sleeping, more than a typical workday, and out of those 9 hours, more than 6 of them happen on a phone. The strange thing about this is that most people already know that it's happening. Large majorities of young users say they spend too much time on their phones. Many even describe themselves as addicted, and millions have attempted some version of a digital detox. Open almost any modern app and you'll find algorithms designed to make sure there's always one more thing to look at. There's always another video, another recommendation, or another reason to stay. And increasingly, consumers are exhausted by it. Across the technology world, people have started looking for products that do less and not more. It's led to the popularity of those digital detoxes, the rise of minimalist phones, and even the renewed interest in paper planners, notebooks, and physical media. All of these things point towards the same idea. After decades of adding features, some consumers are beginning to value limits. With the Titan 2 Elite, it might look like people are buying a keyboard, but really they're not. They're buying distance. Distance from endless feeds, from constant notifications, and from apps that compete for every spare second of attention. The keyboard phone is simply one expression of a much larger trend. It's a growing desire for technology that feels more intentional. But even so, there's still one more very important point that we need to explain. Why a keyboard? After all, there are plenty of simpler phone designs, so what is it about a keyboard that keeps attracting people? The thing about a keyboard is that it changes how you use the phone. Modern smartphones have been optimized for consuming content, but keyboard phones move in the opposite direction. Not dramatically, but just enough to matter. Watching TikTok on a large modern smartphone feels natural, but watching it on a small square screen surrounded by a physical keyboard is not nearly as enjoyable. Scrolling works on a keyboard phone, but it feels just a bit less inviting. Instead, messages and email are what feels natural. The keyboard isn't valuable because it makes the phone better at everything. It's valuable because it changes what the phone is good at. It makes communication easier and consumption harder. For a growing number of people, that's exactly the point. They want their phone to be a tool and not a toy. Looking at it this way, the success of phones like the Titan 2 Elite starts making a bit more sense. The people buying them are looking for a different relationship with technology. This also means that Unihertz has a good chance of succeeding where Blackberry failed. Blackberry sold keyboards because they help people do more, but Unihertz is selling them because they help people do less. Blackberry believed the keyboard was a technical advantage, but in 2026, it has become a psychological advantage. And that's why the keyboard phone is back. Not because the technology changed, but because the world around it did.